So the year was 1941. And if you're in England, what's going on in 1941? World War II, lights are out and the bombs are dropping, and you're huddled up with your family somewhere, hopefully as safe as you can get with the lights out so the German planes don't have targets, and got the radio on to BBC. And over the airways comes this strange man who's an Oxford professor of medieval literature. You think your degree was a waste. He has a degree in medieval literature, and he's describing over the airwaves in these short talks what he thinks Christianity is about. Not a specific version of Christianity. He's Anglican. His good buddy J.R.R. Tolkien is Catholic, but he says, I'm trying to present neither and none of the above. It's just what is the same in every rendition of Christianity that everybody agrees on. What is mere Christianity? So he does these talks. Name's Clive Staples Lewis, which is just the coolest name ever. Celine wouldn't let me name either of our kids Clive. Calvin is as close as I got. Clive Staples Lewis, and they end up taking the talks and making them into 3 books, and then they combine them into one book called Mere Christianity. And that's what I want to talk about for the next several weeks. You can get it in a whole bunch of different versions. The one that I use the most often, I have this complete C.S. Lewis set that I bought at some point that I have written notes all over it, the parts I like and don't like, and you have all insight into my brain if anybody ever reads my notes all over it. And then I have this edition given to me by the church at Glenpool before I left there, which is kind of neat because it has photographs throughout of England in 1941. So from that era kind of interspersed in the pages, which give you some context. It's a fascinating book because it resonates with us today, I think, as we go through it really well. And yet it was set in a really dark and murky context. Humanity was putting its very worst on display in World War II. And here's this guy on the radio saying, you know what's great? Christianity. Let's talk about that. And the section we're going to do, there's 4 different sections of the talks. What we're going to talk about is the third book, which is called Christian Behavior, or we're going to call it Mere Morality. It's his part of explaining what Christian right and wrong was supposed to look like in his mind. Why would I want to talk about that kind of independent of the rest of it? When I'm thinking about what it is about Christianity that is most confusing and convoluted to people, I think there's a lot of folks that think of Christianity as just a bunch of rules, or they know Christianity as those people who are against some stuff. Like they know our opposition. They know things we don't like, not as much what we're in favor of. What Lewis does, I think, really well is to explain the internal logic of Christian right and wrong in a way that most folks can say, oh, well, okay, I guess that's fair. And then he's just a guy talking about it, so you don't even have to agree with him, but it's at least a rational presentation of what Christian morality could be about. So the first talk is about 3 parts of morality. And what I'm going to do is kind of give you kind of the setup. He's trying to answer questions and thoughts, give you a little quote from him, and then give you some scripture that kind of this is where he's drawing from, and give us some time to discuss what he's trying to say. His first big claim is that morality has 3 parts, and we'll get to that in just a second. First question, we might ask, why do we need morality at all? Why worry about right and wrong at all? If that's the part nobody likes about religion anyway, right? Why bother? That's a question you can answer now. What do you think? Why do we bother with right and wrong or morality?
Here's an innate human response And I think he talks about, somebody who says there is no actual objective morality, and then you cut in front of them in a line.
Yeah.
They're going to be like, no.
Yeah. There's this great episode on, I will. Great episode on Twitter that happens, this little incident where Richard Dawkins, who is like world's most famous angry atheist, and one of his most famous quotes is, there's no such thing as morality. We're all just dancing to the tune of our DNA, right? You're just a biological entity. You're just doing whatever you're programmed to do. There's no right and wrong. And then at some point in his life, Dawkins is a huge cricket fan. And this guy very obviously cheats in a very prestigious cricket match. And Dawkins is all over Twitter complaining about the indecency and immorality of cheating at this game. And all the Christians kept tweeting back, it's just dancing to the tune of his DNA. I mean, how can you not care about right and wrong except in cricket, right? He's fine with murder and genocide if that floats your boat, but don't cheat at sports, right? So, yeah, it turns out that most of us, even the person who says, I don't buy into right and wrong, until you cut in my line and you bother my stuff, and it's like, well, yeah, I like it now. What other reasons do we think we have that right and wrong stuff? Sorry? We've been wronged before, and we need to kind of get an account of that and say, why did that happen? And what made it wrong? And why shouldn't people do it again? Okay.
So like Dawkins would say, it's conducive to a good society. It helps us perform as a species at a higher level.
Even if you don't even believe in God, on like the secular level, it's kind of nice to live in a country where people aren't stabbing you like every hour or stealing all your stuff, right? I mean, not beyond just myself, but just as a society, it's kind of nice to have some ground rules that we live between so I can get down the street to the grocery store and back without dying, right? So the way Lewis explains it, he says, in reality, moral rules are instructions for running the human machine. He says, think of yourself as a machine, which probably was a cooler metaphor in 1941 than it is now. But think of yourself as some kind of machine, and you need to run correctly. We don't want you to break down. How do we keep humans from breaking down? Well, we give them some instructions, and we say, here's the things that work, and here's the things that don't work. Do the things that work. Killing people doesn't work for us. Being kind to people works for us. He says, so at the most basic level, if you just want to operate as a human being, you're going to need some rules. And we call those rules morality. Yeah, but why do we have to have rules? Why can't we just have morality, but not the rules? Like if I'm just kind of nice to people or generally kind and thoughtful of others, do I really need rules? I mean, you see the difference, for example, we could say for the streets outside, drive safely. Or we could say, don't drive over 25 miles per hour in a school zone. Well, why do we have to get specific and have rules and so forth? Why can't we just tell people don't run into other people? Why do we have rules?
People interpret that very differently.
Say that?
People interpret things very differently. Okay,
so drive safely could be very different in different people's heads. It evidently is, right? I've driven with some of you anyway. Yeah, it's very different, right, of what counts as more or less good. So to keep us at least kind of on the same page, we put some rules in place.
It's possible to keep it in place. It's like telling someone to hold a cup of water without the cup.
Yeah, it gives some substance to the idea. Otherwise, it's so open-ended and open interpretation. I don't know if I've done it right or not, and I don't know if you've done it right or not, and I don't know if anybody's done it right or not. I need some shape to this. So what Lewis would say is, when you're being taught how to use any machine, the instructor keeps on saying, no, don't do it like that. Because, of course, there are all sorts of things that look all right and seem to you the natural way of treating the machine, but do not really work. The illustration that comes to mind for me, for a few years as a kid, I was a very bad baseball player, as every kid should be at some point in their life. And the coach at some point tries to tell you how to swing a bat. And when he does that, there's some way that you think you do it. And he says, no, not like that. Stand with your feet like this. Okay, and you do that, and you fling all your arms out there. He says, no, not like that. Put your arms like this. And you do it again. And he keeps adjusting it. If you do it wrong long enough, it feels natural. But it's still not right? You're not going to have the best possible results. And so some guy says, no, and Jerry comes to you and says, no, you're doing it wrong. Hold your elbow like this. And it doesn't, you say, that doesn't feel right. He says, yeah, just trust me, it works. And then you learn the better way of doing something, and it doesn't feel right at first, but over time, it works. And it makes a difference. And so that's what Lewis is saying about morality, that sometimes it doesn't even look like it makes sense at first. But what we're saying is these rules have worked. Telling the truth, that one's been tested a few times. It works out. Yeah, I know, but it'd be really convenient if I lied right now. Just telling you. All of human history says telling the truth is good. So maybe stick with that one, okay? Proverbs 14:12 says it like this: there is a way that seems right to a man, but its end is the way to death. That I'm not actually a trustworthy guide to right and wrong within myself. I'm really good at noticing when you do something wrong, by the way, but I'm not so great at noticing just objectively what's a right and what's a wrong. The Proverbs warn us there's a lot of things you're going to experience in life or encounter or come up with as think-sos about right and wrong, and they're going to feel right, and they may not be. So one of the reasons we have rules exterior to us is to kind of keep us between the hedges, because our own sense is not always trustworthy. I think humans do have a moral sense. I do think that comes programmed. I do think the programming can go bad, but I do think it's in there. You do have some sense of morality that God has given every one of us, but it can be undone. And so writers of old say we have to be aware of the fact that we need something outside of us to kind of keep us on the straight and narrow, as we say.
I think that's why it's so interesting in early childhood behavior and development, why it's so stressed. Parenting and parent your child, those things come into play and affects you as an adult. So obviously something's going on there in terms of your compass inside.
Yeah, those rules are kind of orienting the compass for a child, the moral compass. And then later in life, you hope that it works, right? That's the idea. So, okay, Ben says rules are good. So is that all we need? Is that what morality is all about? Give me a list of rules, and then we'll have morality. You ever tried that, by the way? Write down all the rules of right and wrong that a person ought to know. Yeah.
My child, maybe Christopher, will find the one that you left out.
Yeah. All children at birth come with a broken moral compass and a law degree. And they know how to argue their way in circles around rules, don't we? So there are some problems if I only have rules, and that's all my morality amounts to. And let me say that's one of the probably biggest gripes, and maybe the most legitimate gripe about Christianity and morality, is that sometimes Christians reduce their morality to a set of rules, and they say, okay, there's my rules. And they don't know what they're for, and they don't know what to do with them. They just have rules. And that's not a really impressive way to do right and wrong. So what C.S. Lewis says, that's not how Christians are supposed to do it. Why? Number one, rules can be twisted and misunderstood. Again, if you're a parent, have you given a kid a rule that they managed to keep the letter of the rule without actually doing anything you wanted? Yeah, again, they come born with that kind of evil genius. I don't know. Before I had kids, I didn't believe in total hereditary depravity, but now I wonder, Because they're very clever at getting around rules and saying, well, technically, go run the vacuum in your room. Well, it was on, and it was in my room, but no vacuuming actually happened. Well, that's not. So that's not new. And in the moral sense, think about our friends, the Pharisees or the scribes in the New Testament, Matthew 23:23, Jesus rebukes them. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you tithe mint and dill and cumin, and have neglected the weightier matters of the law, justice and mercy and faithfulness. These you ought to have done without neglecting the others. He says, yeah, you had some rules, even some very specific rules. You don't have them in order. And in fact, you managed to use some to neglect others. So even while meticulously following some of their rules, they weren't being very morally good. And that's Jesus' complaint. So rules aren't going to be enough. The second problem is you can never have enough rules. And you know this, as your kids grow up, you start out with negative rules, don't do this, but it requires an infinite number of negative rules to really build the fence where you want it. Because there's always one more thing that you haven't nailed down, right? Can you imagine the size of a Bible if God had decided to list for all of human history everything he didn't want you to do? Like in excruciating detail. That wouldn't even make sense to read. For one thing, it would be funny to have people in Corinth saying, now this is the book about the internet that hasn't come yet, but when it gets here, here's how to comment on Facebook. We don't know what that is, but here it is, right? That rule is not going to be able to be written that wheelbarrow to carry the scrolls in. It's not going to be able to be written that way. You'll never have enough rules to really say everything you want to say about morality, right and wrong. So you need some. They can't do the job for you. Rules are like kind of the guide rails on the highway, where there's a spot where people are inclined to fly off the road. You put some of those metal rails up. But more often than not, you don't have hundreds of miles of metal, on every square inch of the highway forcing you to go one way or the other. You say, okay, keep it between these lines, and on this curve, don't fly off. Because you just can't put a sign everywhere that somebody could do something stupid. Imagine that. Don't swerve here. Don't swerve there. Don't swerve here. It'd be impossible. It'd be silly. Furthermore, another problem with rules, number 3, that Lewis points out, a mistake in one rule compounds the problem elsewhere. Rules kind of stack on top of each other like math. Okay, so I, for a lot of years, taught adjunct physics and astronomy. And I love kinematic problem-solving assignments. I'm like the only person on the planet that thinks those are fun. But there's lots of steps involved. And so for any one problem, you're going to have a whole page worth of work. And when I teach it, I tell the students, I know this is a pain, but I want you to write out every step for me. Because I want to give you points. Even if the answer's wrong, if I can see where you went wrong, I'll give you points for all the rest of it. So if you take my physics class, no kidding, you get a point for drawing a picture, a stick figure at the beginning of the problem and labeling it correctly. Like, drop a man off a cliff, stick figure, cliff, down, right? 2 points. Really generous. What equation do you think you ought to use? Well, maybe this one. 2 points. You picked an equation. I'm really generous. You can get 80% of the points and get the wrong answer in my physics class. By process. But there's always some kid who is way too smart and way too lazy and just writes down the answer at the end, which is great, except when he's wrong. Because he made a mistake in step 1 and I can't see any other steps. I can't tell him how to fix it because he did the first step of addition wrong or something, right? Or he put the arrow in the wrong direction. Okay. Negative sign in the wrong place. And that's kind of how morality works too. If you decide hurting other people is okay. Does it really matter what your second rule is? It's not going to come out okay. If you decide, rule number 1, do whatever's best for me. Rule number 2 may be great, but it's not going to work out. So with rules, getting one wrong, and you get way off in the weeds in a hurry. Okay? Think about following a map or listening to your GPS. If you take one wrong turn, it does those course corrections, they get messy. Okay? Furthermore, and this is actually the most important thing that Lewis wants to tell us, rules don't answer the question morality is really all about. Which gets back to his initial point. What are you supposed to be doing? How does this human machine work? How do I live a good life? Rules keep you from flying off the highway. They don't tell you where you're going. And they certainly don't help you enjoy the trip. Rules keep us safe within some boundaries, but they don't answer the big questions. So what Lewis will say is we need at least two different types of things in our morality. Rules mostly help how we interact on the outside. Again, don't fly off the edge of the road. We also need ideals that help how we are on the inside. What people see are the rules. How come? Because they're on the outside, right? You can't see my ideals. You can't look inside my head and say, what are Ben's principles? All you can see are the rules I live by, how I apply them, and how I treat people, like external things. And that says a lot, don't get me wrong. So what Christians often get judged by are the rules, and what we get hung up on are the rules. But we're going to need more than that. In fact, quite a lot. So what Lewis wants to say is, in fact, morality has three parts. And the way he explains it, this is the great big metaphor I want everybody to take home with you. If you don't get anything else out of this meandering discussion, we want the big metaphor. Okay, humanity is this fleet of ships moving across the ocean. When was this written, by the way?
1941.
1941, World War II. We're shipping cargo back and forth across, right? Important time. And he says, well, it's kind of like a bunch of ships going across the ocean. And there's three things you got to have a successful ocean voyage. Number one, each ship must be prevented from colliding with other ships. Okay? If you're out there on the ocean and you run into the ship next with you, doesn't really matter what else we did right. That was wrong enough. Okay? So the first part of morality is involving how we interact with other people. Matthew chapter 7, verse 12, no surprise, one of the centers of Christ's teaching of morality. So whatever you wish that others would do to you, do also to them, for this is the law and the prophets. Okay? What's the simple thing for Christ when it comes to morality? Part one, don't run into other people's boat. Right? Don't do to them what you don't want done to you. Treat them the way you want to be treated. It's about personal interactions. Okay, don't run into other people's boat. Or Romans 14, 7 through 15. This is Paul in the section where he's talking about whether or not you should eat meat offered to idols. And in the text, he says, there is a right answer to this, but none of us lives to himself, none of us dies to himself. Therefore, let us not pass judgment on one another any longer, but rather decide never to put a stumbling block or hindrance in the way of a brother. For if your brother is grieved by what you eat, you are no longer walking in love. By what you eat, do not destroy the one for whom Christ died. He says there is a right answer here, but don't run into other people's boat. Right? Don't run into anybody else's ship. If you cause him to sink, but you're convinced your bearing was good, doesn't matter, you still ran into somebody else's ship. That person over there is someone for whom Christ died. And so morality has to include the right treatment of other people. And that's part number one. Part number two, each individual ship must be seaworthy. Okay, so if step one is don't run into anybody, step two is don't sink. We can keep this real easy. Don't hit anybody else's ship, don't sink. Again, you can brag all you want. I didn't run into a single ship. How'd you do? Sank to the bottom, right? Not a very good trip. So morality is going to have to include something about yourself on the inside that's healthy and whole and keeps you from sinking. So here's Matthew, again, Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew 5, 29, 30. If your right eye causes you to sin, tear it out and throw it away. For it's better that you lose one of your members than that your whole body be thrown into hell. If your right hand causes you to sin, cut it off and throw it away. For it's better that you lose one of your members than your whole body go into hell. What's interesting about that one, especially the first one, is the eye. Your eye ever hurt anybody else? And my hands might hurt somebody else. Has your eye ever hurt anybody else? Kind of tough, right? Only person it's hurting is you. And Jesus says that still matters. In fact, he even lists it first. That it does matter. I think there's a brand of morality we'll talk about in just a minute that says as long as you don't hurt anybody else, everything else is okay. And Jesus says hurting yourself is not okay. You have to make sure you yourself are doing what's good and healthy. Another way to say it, the eye is the lamp of the body. So if your eye is healthy, your whole body will be full of light. But if your eye is bad, your whole body will be full of darkness. If then the light in you is darkness, how great is the darkness? No one can serve two masters. Either he'll hate the one and love the other, or he'll be devoted to the one and despise the other. You can't serve God and money. Everything in that section is internal. That's not how I treat somebody else. That's what am I thinking about personally? Where are my affections and desires personally? What's going on in my own heart? Where are my allegiances and my devotions within me? All internal. And Jesus says, yeah, that part of morality does matter. Does Jesus think you should treat other people well? Yes, he does. Does he think it matters what kind of person you are when nobody's looking? Yeah, it does. Both of those are pertaining to morality. And then maybe the best expression of both of those, why do you seek the speck that is in your brother's eye, but do not notice the log that's in your own eye? For how can you say to your brother, let me take the speck out of your eye, when there is a log in your own eye? You hypocrite. First take the log out of your own eye, then you will see clearly to take the speck out of your brother's eye. Do we get fixated sometimes on other people and what they're doing and that part of morality? We do. Does it matter? Yeah, hey, if you got a speck in your eye, I'd like to help you with that. Nobody likes a speck in your eye. But if you've got a log in your own eye, Jesus says maybe start there, right? Maybe that's where morality needs to start for you. Because you're not going to do anybody any good until your own, to use Lewis's point, till your own ship is seaworthy. I use this example all the time in teaching and preaching and in counseling with people of how bad a swimmer I am. I like to tell the story because people enjoy mocking me. But I'm a terrible swimmer. I have always been a bad swimmer. Once upon a time, my parents took me down to Seminole State College and they said, hey, they've got these swimming lessons. Take our son, teach him how to swim and not die in water. So I went and I did the whole thing, the whole week. And at the end, the last day of the whole big camp is teaching like how to save somebody else. And the instructor says to me, Ben, if someone's drowning, you should not help them. Because then there'll be two people drowning. Dead serious, right? Okay. If I'm sinking, I can't help you float. I'm a terrible swimmer. If you're drowning, my job is to say, help, that guy's drowning. That's as close to the situation as I need to be. Other situations, I might be more helpful. That one, not so much. Okay? I'll throw a life vest at you and hit you in the head. That's as good as I can do. But in life, I've known a lot of people who really want to help other people, even well-intended, but they're sinking themselves. If you're not treading water yourself, you really can't take on any more weight. You can't help. So Jesus says, even if your motives were good, which I'm not sure is his point here, but even if they were, your own vessel has to be seaworthy. You got to take care of internal morality as well.
It's like the instructions on a flight, put your oxygen mask on first.
Yeah.
So that you can help more people.
Yeah, put your oxygen mask on first. Why? Because after you've passed out, it doesn't matter what the second thing you were going to do was. Yeah. Okay. So you have to kind of be aware of that. So there's three parts of morality. Part one was outside, harmony between individuals. Don't run in other people's boat. Part two is inside, harmony within the individual. I've got to be healthy and whole and doing what a human's supposed to be doing. What might be the third part, if you had to guess? That seems like everything, right? Inside and outside. Isn't that all the sides?
Destination.
Destination. Yeah. Turns out, if you don't run into anybody's boat and you don't sink, but you have no idea where you're going, still not a fun trip. Okay? So the voyage has to end at the right destination. We have to know where we're going. We have to kind of get there. Okay? So, for example, Isaiah 57:15, "For thus says the one who is high and lifted up, who inhabits eternity, whose name is holy. I dwell in the high and holy place, and also with him who is of a contrite and lowly spirit, to revive the spirit of the lowly and revive the heart of the contrite." The goal of the faithful life is to be with God. It's more, I've said this in sermons before too, it's more about going to the person than the place. When it comes to God, I'm not worried about the geography. If he was in Albuquerque, that would be heaven. I mean, it's fine, right? Wherever God is, that's where but it's to go to this person. I dwell in the high and holy place. What I want is for you to dwell with me, for you to be where I am. That's the destination, to be with God. And it's expressed in a handful of different ways in the Bible. What will it profit a man if he gains the whole world and forfeits his soul? What shall a man give in return for his soul? Like, if you got everything right and your soul does not rest with God at the end of the story, we didn't get where we're going. Doesn't matter what else we got out of it. Brothers, join in imitating me and keep your eyes on those who walk according to the example you have in us. For many of whom I have often told you and now tell you even with tears, walk as enemies of the cross of Christ. Their end is destruction, their God is their belly, and they glory in their shame with minds set on earthly things. But our citizenship is in heaven, and from it we await a Savior, the Lord Jesus Christ, who will transform our lowly body to be like his glorious body by the power that enables him to be subject to all things to himself. And again, even there, our citizenship is in heaven, but it's not the geography, it's not the location, it's who's there, right? Our citizenship is in heaven because that's where we're waiting for Jesus to come from, right? I'm staring there because I'm waiting for him to appear. It's the person of God, of Jesus Christ, of his Spirit. That's my destination. I want to be with him. And if at the end of the trip I'm not with him, none of the other stuff really mattered. So morality then seems to be concerned with three things. Firstly, with fair play and harmony between individuals. Secondly, with what might be called tidying up or harmonizing the things inside each individual. And thirdly, with the general purpose of a human life as a whole. What man was made for. What course the whole fleet ought to be on. What tune the conductor of the band wants to play. So, outside, inside, and where are we going? Those three things have to work in concert to have a real sense of morality that Christians believe in. Harmony between individuals, harmony within each individual, purpose or meaning of life. In Christianity, we talk a lot about number one, because again, that one's easy. Don't punch your neighbor. Like, I can tell you that one. It's very concrete, very practical. That's where we start with our kids. Don't hit your brother. Say that a lot at our house. Stop hitting your brother. Okay. But then what you want to move towards is something further in. Don't hate your brother. In fact, don't hate anybody. Be a different kind of person on the inside. And then even further, we want to say, be a person made in the image of God. God loves everybody. Be that kind of person. There's a goal to your life, to imitate God, to be like him. So that's what makes a whole shape of morality. Doesn't mean any of it's unimportant. It's just we tend to emphasize one bit or the other depending on what kind of mood we're in. What happens when we don't have all three components? Okay. All manner of chaos. And we can see different versions of this. Suppose we decide we don't want any rules at all. Again, as I said at the beginning, nobody actually wants to live that way. Outback Steakhouse, what's the motto? No rules, just right. So if I pick up my steak and throw it at my waiter and he gets mad, I'm like, hey, no rules, just right. No. If I walk out and don't pay, hey, no rules, just right. I mean, they want a fun, free atmosphere, but at the end of the day, there are some rules, like pay for your dinner. Don't punch your waiter, right? There's going to be rules, because otherwise we can't have a good time without it. The Corinthians had moral anarchy, right? We're just, hey, it's legal, it's okay. And a lot of 1 Corinthians chapter 6 in particular is Paul trying to say, there's more to being a human, never mind being a Christian, than just what happens to be legal today. We're going to need more to morality than that. We do need some rules. What about rules without meaning? Well, that was our friends the Pharisees, who knew all the rules, knew them very well, had them memorized, had them numbered, had them codified, written out, but didn't really know where they were headed with it. They tithed, but they didn't learn generosity. See the difference? Like they were getting some things right, but not meaning and ideals. You could have a no harm, no foul philosophy, which I think is probably one of the more common views of morality today, that as long as I don't hurt anybody else, what does it matter to you what I do? Well, sinking ships don't run into each other. They're still sinking. That's not good. There's more than one way to mess up the ship. Just the fact that you didn't hurt anybody else doesn't mean that you're doing what a ship should be doing. There's something to it. Self-centered piety. Maybe if I just get myself right, the rest of y'all don't matter. That's real easy to do, certainly in religion, to get very internally focused. My ship is not sinking. Who cares about the rest of you ships, right? Or even the end justifies the mean. I've got the right destination. Does it really matter if I run into anybody and everybody drowns on the way there? As long as we're headed the right way. Yeah, it kind of does matter if you run into the other boats on the way there. Okay. So what we're going to need really are all three parts. I'm not going to run into somebody else. I'm not going to sink. And I'm going the right direction. It's what makes for good morality. So whose job is it then for us to have all these three parts of morality, to be good people and to make this work? Whose job is that?
I think it takes everyone.
Sorry?
I think it takes everyone.
Everyone? That's an unfair answer. Everyone. Come on, be more specific. Whose job is it? Who's really got to do it?
Each of us an individual.
Okay. Everyone, each of us. But who's responsible? Like who's going to make sure we actually do it?
I can control it completely.
What about everybody else? I mean, all you can do is keep your ship from running into me. You can't keep my ship from running into you. So we're all just going to run into each other? That's the plan? Who's going to make sure this works?
Are you looking for the answer being God and His Word?
I'm just asking questions today. I don't know.
So, you know what they say in kids' craze thing, the answer's always going to be God.
The answer's going to be God eventually if we get to it, right? Well, let me ask a question differently. Whose job have we made morality? Like, who do we hold responsible for making everything, all the rules the way they're supposed to be, and everybody's doing what they're supposed to be doing? Yeah. In modern society, it's become the government's job to pass laws, to criminalize bad behavior. And that's not new. But definitely in the last few hundred years, we've put more and more burden on the government to do that. And Lewis wants to talk about that. Okay? And he says, you cannot make men good by law, and without good men, you cannot have a good society. So he's very pro-government. He doesn't have a problem with government. He's not an anarchist. He just says you need to know the limits and the order of things. If you want the British government in 1941 to make everybody good, the only way that the government's going to be any good is if the rules are good. The only way the rules are going to be any good is if the people who make the rules are good, and they aren't any good. point of fact, on the other side of the channel was Nazi Germany, right? They had a very strong government, had lots of great rules, and also some terrible rules, right? Because there were some terrible people making rules. So ultimately, he describes what's been called as the good society problem. Like, I need a good society to make good people, but I need good people to make a good society. And he says there's just limits of what a government can ever do for us. Governments can make rules and policies. That true? Yeah. And I'd like them to make some good ones. Governments can even try to set a goal or destination. I'm a little skeptical of that one, but they can try. Like, this is kind of the end state. We want to have a good country. We want it to look like this, everybody's nice to each other, and we all live long and prosper, or whatever else. I don't know what it is, but we can have some kind of end state in mind. But government can't even touch the interior part of man. It has no access. It's not capable of it. And so if we kind of push all of our goals for morality and say, government, take care of that, there's at least one part of morality that never gets touched. The part where the ship doesn't sink, right? It can't do that job. What I think is just really insightful, that what does modern morality look like? Rules and goals, but nobody made inside to be the kind of people who could do any of those things. Because government can't do that. What kind of thing could make a difference to what's going on inside of you? If only there was some other organization of people who... Your turn. God, yes. If only, yes. If only there was some, super divine power who, through the influence of his word and his people, shaped and molded people from the inside out by his spirit to be what they ought to be. If only we had something like that. And that's kind of where Lewis is headed, right? Yeah. If you're all your chips and all your eggs are in the government basket, you can get number one, you can kind of get number two, you can never make them who they're supposed to be on the inside. Morality has to be an inside job. And that's where God works. It seems then that if we are to think about morality, we must think of all three departments. Relations between man and man, things inside each man, and the relations between man and the power that made him. All right, we're going to need interactions, what's inside, and my purpose. And for at least two of those, I have to talk about God. And Lewis gets kind of sarcastic if you read the chapter. He's like, I know, here I go talking about religion again. He says, but it turns out if you start talking about right and wrong, you get to religion eventually. Because there's some part of that is connected. You got to have it. Okay, so we got 10 or 12 minutes left. So that's my summary. You can go read it on your own. But that's the basic sense of what he thinks morality is all about. Okay, what it looks like. So here are my questions for you, or you throw out your own questions and ignore me, as you often do. Number one, do you agree with Lewis's explanation of the purpose of rules? Is that what it is? Is that fair? Is he too hard on rules? Is he too soft on rules? Rules good, rules bad? I'm going to talk about rules. I had a professor who was very keen on what's called command-based ethics, which is rule-based. Everything is rule-based. And so anytime I would throw out Lewis or any of these guys that were like, yeah, I'm going to need more than rules, he says, well, they're wrong about that. And he'd write it in the margin of my essays. It was a big thing. So maybe you're that way. Okay. Number two, is there more or less to Christian morality than Lewis thinks? If so, what did he put in there that didn't need to be there? What did he leave out that should have been added? What else do we need to talk about? And number three, if that's what morality is, let's say he's right for a minute. Got to have those three things, and apparently we need some kind of God involved to make that work. Is it possible for this view of Christian morality to flourish in a secular or pluralistic society? i.e., the society we live in isn't particularly sold on the idea that there is a top-down morality from God that's going to guide everybody. That's an option for you personally, but on like the national level, we're just like, that's not how we're going to organize things on purpose from the founding. That's the idea. Okay. So is it possible then, if God has to be involved in morality, and we've said from the outset, we're going to set God kind of over in this corner, is it even possible then? Are we doomed? Should we all go home and cry? Or do you have some good news for us? Those are my questions. And then you have yours that have nothing to do with what I said. So what do you think?
They can only flourish in a secular and pluralistic society within the church if the church is faithful. Otherwise, you have what we have today.
So the typical, I'm going to say typical Church of Christ answer, but like our brand of Christian heritage, our answer has been, yes, we can do it amongst ourselves. The Anabaptists, where some of our heritage comes from, a lot of them just said, we're not going to participate in government as a whole. David Lipscomb, probably the most notable Church of Christ preacher of his period of time, said, don't vote, don't go to war, don't be in the military. If you could get away with not paying taxes, don't do that either. Don't be involved in government. Government's the devil. Stay out of it. We'll just be good amongst ourselves, and we'll let Sodom and Gomorrah burn, right? That's a little bit much. Sorry. Even Lipscomb didn't go quite that far, but close. So, I mean, one option, and I don't know that's what you were saying, but one option is to say, okay, well, we can do it amongst ourselves. Well, then what happens to everything else, and that's, so, okay, then we start saying, so how involved, we're going to do it amongst ourselves. How involved am I going to be in the folks that aren't playing the same game I am? Remembering that influence always goes both ways. For me to be a good influence on my society opens me up to having a bad influence work the other direction on me. And that's like the challenge of the good society problem of how do you do it?
Well, the question is, can it flourish in the wider society?
Yeah.
And outside of it, no, it can't. Yeah. Now, the church can, like I said, can influence it, can be a positive force, but only as far as it is faithful to God and Scripture. Once it stops doing that, it loses all influence that it would have, and instead the river flows the other way.
Yeah. I think of Daniel in Babylon as an example of, can Daniel be a good influence on Babylon?
Sure.
Yeah. Can he make the lives of people better in Babylon? Yeah. Can he make Nebuchadnezzar's paganism good?
No.
No. I mean, it's not healthy. It's bad. Nebuchadnezzar wants to serve God. He can influence him in that direction. Like there's a limit of how good a system that starts out with not God can be. At best, you could get to maybe neutral. Paul in 1 Timothy 2 says, pray that we may live a quiet life.
We will never make LGBT ideology good. We won't. It's not compatible. But as far as we can influence people into what is right, what's true, sure.
Yeah.
But that's only going to go so far. Daniel Babylon. He can be a good influence, but it's only going to go so far.
Yeah. So the guys who would disagree, just for the sake of discussion, would be guys who believe that Christians, just by being salt in the mix, make it better for everybody, even the people that aren't buying in, to a meaningful degree. And I'm just never convinced. It depends what day of the week it is when you ask me how cynical I am about whether that works or not. Some days I'm like, yeah, go out there and make the world better and you can do it. And part of me is ready to build a monastery up here on the hill and say, just build a fence around it. I'm fine. Leave me alone. I've got books and coffee. Yeah. So it's a hard thing for Christians to figure out, like, where is that balance of how to be, if we're not even playing the same game. That's the point I think Lewis is making. We're not all playing the same game in this thing called morality. How does it work? And he doesn't have answers either, by the way. He just throws the question out there and he's like, we're going to need good people for a good society. Good luck with that. Next chapter. What else?
If you have rules, you have to have consequences. And for Christian morality to work, you have to have grace, because if you say you mess up on one of the rules, you can't just write yourself off and say, oh, well, none of the rules matter now. Like, I've already missed the destination.
Yeah, that's a good conversation to add to this. That kind of in between two extremes again. Got to have consequences for rules, or it didn't matter. On the other hand, if the consequences are absolute, everybody who makes who fails, let's not even say mistake, everyone who morally fails the first time is done. You can't get to your destination. That makes the rest of the trip kind of pointless.
I think that's where the church needs to work on grace.
Yeah.
I'll say it like that. Even in my own life, I've known people who check out of church because of that. I missed that more, messed that up, love on them more. And I think that goes where as Christians, we are going to have to find a way to show grace, love, and still find a way to say, we'll still apply right again.
Yeah.
Well, if the ship reaches a hole in the military, say you're in the military, they don't say, oops, hole breach is going down, whatever. Yeah. They fix it. They bring out the patch. They have ways, they work on ways to fix the failure so they can keep going.
If only there was somebody who could repair our ship, help the ships we ran into, and rechart our course. Jenna, it's you. Who could do that? God, yes, yeah. I mean, that's what we need. I mean, that's the part of morality, and there is a whole section in this, by the way, later on forgiveness, where he says that's the part of morality that really only Christianity offers the world. Every religion on the planet tells you how to do it right. I don't know of any other religion on the planet that says, and God will help you when you've done all three wrong. Ma'am.
One thing that I don't think was addressed is regarding a purpose of rules is identification of where your loyalty lies. Mm-hmm. And that's a whole big conversation.
Yeah, it is. I mean, and sometimes that's helpful for me when I'm talking to somebody. This could take us a whole other strange direction, but I'll say, there is such a thing as Christian morality. What do you mean? Like, it's what identifies you as a Christian. I mean, it's I live this way because I believe in Jesus and these things. You don't, and so it's kind of hard for me to expect you. I'm not saying it would not even necessarily make sense for you to do all the same things I'm doing, but for a follower of Christ, this would be the only way it could be because of who he is and who we're identified in him. You can't follow a crucified man and then go out and crucify people. You know what I mean? Like you can't, there's only so many things you can do and still be a follower of Christ. He says, love everybody. And you're like, hate everyone. It's like, you're not on the same team. I mean, this is a silly example just for fun. Everyone hear that? Okay. So you join the NRA and you go to the first meeting and you say, you know what I think? Let's get rid of all the guns. I think everybody looks at you and they say, you're in the wrong meeting, right? Or you go to a PETA meeting, and the first meeting you say, you know what's great? Killing endangered animals. They're tasty. Right? Again, they're going to say, pretty sure you're at the wrong meeting. Christ says, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And you're like, I'm a me first kind of guy. You're like, I think you're at the wrong meeting. That there is an identity to Christian thought. You have to buy in. Yeah, sir.
Even Paul says in 1 Corinthians 5, what do I have to do with judging those also who are outside? Do not judge those who are inside. But for those who are outside, God judges. Therefore, put away from yourselves the evil person. It says, do it yourself. The world's gonna world.
Yeah.
You handle you.
Yeah. Like it's on the one hand, back to that like influence word, I want the influence to go out, but I can't be the world's moral police officer. I can't even be the church's moral police officer. I've met some of you people. I can't, no. I can't even be responsible for the morality of all the people in this room, let alone on the planet, right? So that let's start with what we can influence meaningfully, and then where we have opportunity, sure, let's expand some. But if our focus is always on those folks out there got problems, back to logs and specks in people's eyes and whatnot. Any other thoughts before we wrap up and conclude? Odie, you've had a thoughtful brow the whole period. I could tell you just marinating. Very good.
I think that maybe something to mention about Lewis's explanation of the rules is he doesn't start talking about those until he spends quite a bit of time addressing the plight that we're in as humans, how we do have this feeling inside of us that there is a right and wrong, and we're not doing that. And then I think before you can really even talk about rules, and maybe it's towards I'm kind of mixed up where exactly he's saying it, but there are some passages in here that are so beautiful, talking about the incredible love and joy and grace of God, and it's like a fountain that's just beautiful. And if you want to get close to those feelings, then where can you be but close to the fountain? And so I feel like when that's our message to the world is, oh, he's so good, and this world has gone wrong, but there is good. And then I think that they hear that, and then it's like some of the rules make a little bit more sense, because it's like, oh, there is a good, God is good. And so if we're going with, even with our kids, it's like, follow the rules, follow the rules, follow the rules. So it's like, do you love me? Like, why would I listen to you? Do you love me? So if we begin all the conversations with rules, talking about how much God loves us and what he wishes for us, then maybe the rules have a smaller place where they're outpouring. Yeah, it's an outpouring out of us of like, well, if God loves me, and not that we'll still make so many mistakes, and then we tell that to the world, come be with us, because we make all these mistakes. Sorry, I'm going for a long time, but maybe that's what they need to hear. Yeah. That's why we do go to church, because we are messed up and we find hope there.
Amen.
There's a reason. There's a mistake in my part of starting with book 3, right? Because
you know how good it is.
Yeah, like part 1 and 2 are about like what's wrong with us and what's right with God, and wow, yeah. But my favorite section on that, and we'll close with this, where he's talking about rules, and he says, I know we talk a lot about rules, but Christians believe we're going to some place where they only talk about rules as if it's a joke. And what he means is that, like, the idea where we're going, when you're standing in the presence of God, and he says, now don't murder, you would just laugh and be like, well, of course not. You're God. Like when you see him for who he is, the rules almost become laughable. It's just here and now, I need some guardrails, but the rules are not the goal. They're just kind of a punchline once we see what the reality is. Right now, I got to have them because I'm me and I haven't got there yet. So give me a couple rules. Tell me not to kill people. Yeah. Amen. Thanks for your attention. Next week, we're going to talk about one of my favorite subjects, virtue.